Pursuant to Standing Order number 98, Mr. Hoskins, you have up to 12 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today, December 10th, is an important day for the province of Ontario, its citizens, Canada, and the world. For today, Mr. Speaker, is International Human Rights Day. 61 years ago this very day, emerging from the experience and the atrocities of the Second World War, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the first truly global expression of the rights to which all human beings are entitled. Drafted by a Canadian, John Humphrey, the Declaration affirms not just our rights as individuals, but also asserts our responsibilities as MPPs, as those who are elected to serve our constituents and ensure that the rights of all Ontarians are safeguarded and upheld. Today, Mr. Speaker, is therefore a day for all of us here to set aside partisanship in support of a just and inclusive Ontario. We all have constituents in our ridings, friends or loved ones, or even, I have no doubt, there are some among us here who have had their human rights violated or denied, or who have been victims of persecution, racism, anti-Semitism, or other forms of discrimination that must be confronted and, in doing so, eradicated. This is the very essence of our democracy, in which all citizens are granted full and equal human rights and opportunity, without exception of any kind. And this is something we can never take for granted. Mr. Speaker, my experiences in some of the most troubled parts of the world, in places like Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the time I have spent meeting with people in my riding who have survived unimaginable horrors before beginning their new lives here in Ontario, have given me a unique appreciation for what we have in this province and for what we can achieve as parliamentarians. There is nothing that makes you appreciate more the essence and the promise of Ontario and Canada than seeing what happens when it has all been stripped away. Democracy, healthcare, respect for human rights, justice, peace, and security. We enjoy these liberties, as is our right, but they cannot be taken for granted, and they must be upheld. And this is the cornerstone of the political process. And this, Mr. Speaker, is why politics matters. Justice can prevail where impunity has thrived, and equality can be achieved where discrimination festers. But only when we, as Ontarians, as Canadians, as those elected to serve, commit to it, invest in it, and are steadfast in defending these inalienable rights. Mr. Speaker, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights calls out specifically to politicians of all party persuasions, asking us to promote and to secure human rights for all of the citizens of Ontario. 20 years ago, Mr. Speaker, while living in Sudan, I shared an office with a Sudanese doctor, Mohammed, who became a close friend. We ate breakfast together most mornings and talked about the freedoms I enjoyed as a Canadian and the threats he faced daily as a Sudanese. At the time, doctors in Sudan, while respected for their social contribution, were largely dismissed when it came to matters of politics. And of course, I'm grateful that we don't yet have that problem here in the Legislative Assembly. But you see, months earlier, there had been a military coup in Sudan, and a brutal and violent dictatorship had replaced the fledgling democracy. Yet eventually, it would be the country's doctors who mustered the courage to stand up and oppose the unelected regime. And when the doctors' union went on strike and publicly opposed the dictatorship, the reaction of the government was as swift as it was brutal. Hundreds of doctors were jailed and many went missing. I became anxious when I arrived at my office the day after the arrests to see Mohammed's chair empty. And I quickly learned that Mohammed had been seized in his home by the security forces. While detained by his own government, Mohammed was beaten, tortured, and then killed. When his body was retrieved by his family, all of his fingernails had been pulled out, and there were burns and bruises covering his broken body. My friend was gone, his human rights trampled. It is for people like my friend Mohammed and the 6 million Jews who were systematically and brutally slaughtered during the Holocaust, and the nearly 1 million Rwandans, and the many millions more who have paid the ultimate price for our actions and inactions globally, that the Universal Declaration was written, and why it is still as relevant now as it was 61 years ago. It is our moral and electoral duty to rise against hatred, against violence, and against injustice, both at home and abroad. In this, we must never falter. Through the passing of the Ontario Human Rights Code in 1962, this House made clear its belief that freedom, justice, and peace are collectively built on the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of every person.